Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. So today, my guest is Glen Tucker. Hi, Glen.
Hi, Judith. Great to be talking to you.
And you. I'm really excited about this conversation. Glen, tell me, and I guess a little bit about you.
Okay, I was born in Britain, but I've travelled all over the place. I studied in Stafford as a mechanical engineer, but after some time working, I got the wanderlust and I went to South Africa, where it was a really great opportunity because there were few engineers. So just to cut a long story short, I spent my first 20 years, if you like, on project management in the Southern African region. And as part of that, I realized that although engineering is a fascinating subject, the basic requirement of any project manager is to handle people. So I'd always been sort of interested in the other side of life, having spent lots of time in the church as a youngster. And so I got very involved in people development, training and development, and changed really my career to that side of things. And the first opportunity was actually in Botswana as training manager. Can you imagine living in the most idyllic part of Africa? It was a wonderful job.
Yes.
But from then on, I basically got very much involved in people development. And of course, I think if you're good at that work, you have to be interested in yourself and do self-analysis and a review of your own situation in life and introspection. So from then on, I spent a lot of time in introspection. I developed my career and did quite a bit of coaching. And so where I'm at today really is in developing my contacts and my coaching business. And part of that is a concept of supervision, which is more like actually helping people to do their own self-reflection, because coaches may talk about people, how they can develop their product or themselves as trainers or as coaches, but supervision is really enabling the person to do their own reflection by looking very carefully at the shadow, at the blind spots that people are not seeing. And I like to do that in a group atmosphere, because then people can feel more empowered. So I only really just finished about 6 months ago an intensive 30 years of corporate work. And so I'm busy launching this side of my business.
Interesting, especially as Socialised Mavericks, one of the things they're very good at doing is that self-reflection and to see what's going on. And
yeah,
what I find really interesting is that I know that recently you read my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. And you contacted me and you said that you wanted to talk about your journey from extreme to Socialised Maverick, which I'm dying to hear. We do that. I just want to refresh the listeners so they can understand what extreme and Socialised Maverick is. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
So I talk about it in my book, and so what I talk about in my book is that extreme mavericks are extremely charming individuals, and they will use manipulation to get their own way if it's necessary. So, but extreme mavericks do have a large circle of friends, and they have a very impressive network, and they're well connected. Extremely blunt, believe in brutal honesty, even if it hurts other people. But one of the good things, I suppose, about extreme mavericks are they're highly successful and they're competent, and they have many admirers and an impressive level of autonomy. But they do have a high degree of self-interest, which often can work against them and others. Socialised Mavericks are very execution and output driven. And one of the things that they hate the most is people that talk about things that don't get on with it and deliver it. highly ethical base, and reputation for honesty. And I found that what tends to happen is that between the two groups is that you have the Mavericks traits and attributes, and extreme Mavericks take those attributes and ensure that it benefits them and them only, and the Socialised Mavericks takes those attributes and make sure that it benefits others. So, Glenn, tell me about your journey.
I think one of the first comments I have is that maybe an extreme maverick doesn't realize they're being an extreme maverick.
Yeah, that's quite common. Quite common.
and therefore, they, and of course there are degrees. Some people are very self-centered. Some people are, like I think I was, self-centered, but also quite a reasonable guy as well. So coming from that point of view, I think a lot of problems come from one's childhood, of course. One of the subjects I'm very interested in is how to overcome those original blueprints that apparently are embedded in us as children up to the age of 5 as a main situation. So I carried a lot of anger, which I wasn't really aware of. That anger sort of came out in survival instinct. And so in the business world, of course, there are situations where it's pretty competitive. And so I was expressing that in my abilities to manage work. And I was pretty successful because, a certain amount of focused aggression, if you like, is quite common, I think, in the business world. Not that that's the best way, of course. So I was working in South Africa, and then I went to Rhodesia, which was a rogue state, if people remember that at some stage. And at that stage, I was doing pretty well, and I was getting great contracts, running them. And I came across a group that was a fairly interesting group for me, as I've always asked the big questions. I think it's interesting. I was in Africa. Everybody looks for the big 5 in Africa. And what I was looking for was the big questions. What is life really about? So whilst I was, and I still obviously have lots of contacts. I'm pretty charismatic. And I think, it's great. But I realized at some stage that there was something missing in my life. It was really, what is it all about? And I came across this group who followed a teacher in India, and I read the book that my friends gave me, much to my wife, who I was married the first time, much to my wife's charang. But it so struck a bell in me that I started my spiritual journey. And as part of that, of course, you look at your life, you start meditating, you change your way of life. And I became gradually, and I must emphasize gradually, because this is not I think the journey from being extreme to being a social maverick is a slow one. For me, it was anyway. And I began to sort of, have a more look at life as a more, what's the right word? I think holistic, or a system whereby whatever you do is the result that you get out of life. And so my aggressive behavior, which was working to some extent, but in other ways, I was finding problems with my colleagues, or the odd customer who obviously pushed back. And so that wasn't working for me. And the spiritual insight, if you like, or the dawning of there was a different way, made me start looking at how I could be more successful with that. So that was really the start of my journey. But I must emphasize that it's been a long journey. It hasn't been a short one.
Yeah. So how do you think you went from being aggressive to assertive?
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that you are. And I think a lot of people, that applies to many other aspects of us. A lot of people, of course, have these blind spots. And I think most of the most of the progress that we can make as human beings is to become aware of those, and we don't see them ourselves, of course. That's the definition of a blind spot. So, as you meditate and you get, if you like, insights, you become calmer, of course. So the energy that is in anger, which I must point out that a lot of these things that people label as faults, or like jealousy and anger and things like that, they are there for a reason. It can be for survival. It can also be from these things that happen in childhood. So what was happening was I was getting realizations of this behavior from doing self review, and of course, the process of meditating, of changing one's lifestyle, also changes the way that other people react with you, and people are quite happy then to act as role models, if you like. So I came across one or two people who I really admired. And as a result of that, of course, I began to look at my own behavior and understand it.
Okay, that's really interesting, because it's quite different from my own journey, in the sense that my first manager in my first proper grown-up job did say to me that, I was too aggressive. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because from my perspective, I was just getting the job done,
Yeah.
and if people were rubbish at their job when I told them to and they improved, then that's a win, isn't it? From my perspective, I didn't understand what the problem was. And I remember telling my friend, I was like, gosh, you ever guess what my boss said today? He said, that was really aggressive. What do you think? And she was a really good friend. She just looked at me and didn't say anything. I went, oh, is it true then? Because she went, kinda. I was like, oh. And that was a real shock. And but the difference that I say with Mavericks really need a compelling reason to change, and also to hear things from people they trust. And I really respected my boss, and I really respected my friend. But for me, I self-reflected in the sense of trying to think of times when people might have reacted to me in a weird way, like, stand back because they thought they were being intimidated. But then I looked at behaviour. So I studied human behaviour so that I could, this is the Maverick thought, still get what I want, but in a much more acceptable way. I didn't really get to sort of like the really kind of pure sort of self-reflection that you're talking about. When I was 17, I was like, right, if I still want to get this done, how do I need to get that? But with anything, when you learn these things, you realise that you yourself have to change for any of it to be effective.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic that you started this journey at a much earlier age than I did. I was 30 when I started mine, and perhaps that was a sign of the times. I think one of the fantastic things we have today is that, people become so aware so much quicker, and there's the tools to do so. And things like Myers-Briggs, many of the different profiles that you can take online, or with the company sometimes that they run these things, it really helps you to see yourself for what you are. And so I'm a great believer in leadership training, doing business profiles, team working, where you observe your behavior and other people report back on that. And I think those are tools that really help with a lot of this dysfunctional behavior, which we have in business. Let's face it, business is not, we don't have lots of saints wandering around doing their best. We have lots of people who are very competitive and still maybe, even if they're not mavericks, they're still quite aggressive. But if we touch on the maverick side, I think that's the other critical thing which I really enjoyed from your book, because I do think that mavericks are not that common. And a maverick, as you so clearly put in your book, is somebody who thinks differently and who does a lot of research. So I realized after a while that when I was having these conversations with people about business or about personal development, I realized that actually, usually they were fairly... they'd done not really much research, and if they had done, it was very one-sided. Because I think the other thing that we mavericks do is we're not just we don't just look at one side of the puzzle or the argument. We also do look at the opposite side and therefore have a balanced view. Certainly that's what I try to do. How about you, Judith? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I was thinking about that when you were saying, because I'm very much like that. When I have an opinion and I start to research, I always research the opposite. So I'm trying to prove myself wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm actively looking for things that disagree with me. And then rather than looking for, like conformity bias, I'm not looking for things that agree with me. I'm looking for things that don't agree with me. And then I assess the stuff that don't agree with me on how I feel about it and whether, and what the evidence is. And then I look and then I look at my view and see what evidence is for that. And then I come with an objective, as much as I can, view as onto the evidence. And I think that's what's interesting about Socialised Mavericks, is they're much more willing to drop a daily held belief if the evidence shows that they're wrong. And there's not many types of personalities that will do that. I will hold fast on something, and then someone says, well, here's the evidence. I do my research and go, yeah, you're right. That's so annoying. But I don't think, I'm stupid for thinking about this. I just think, I'm glad I'm not thinking it anymore, because that would make me stupid. Now I have evidence against that opinion. I can stick with that. But, back to what you were saying about finding out about sort of like extreme maverick behaviour when you're younger. It's, I was really fortunate because my boss, I look back now, he was a socialised maverick. So I really totally respected him. And when he said, these are your deficiencies, I was like, what? But I did respect him enough to go, let me do some research to find out he's true. And it's like, yeah, he is. Best change then.
Fantastic.
But what I do but the thing is that I find, certainly in my practice now, that it is about two things really. It's about helping mavericks harness what they have, and their bosses harness what the mavericks have. But also, especially nowadays, is helping other individuals have maverick behaviour that's beneficial to them. Because if you look at millennials and Generation Z, they want what mavericks have, and they want the same leeway and stuff like that. But what they don't have is the personality, and what they don't necessarily have is the knowledge and the expertise, but they still want that stuff. So it's kind of ensuring that they can still achieve, but you have to give them much more focused education. And when I say education, I mean broadly the term education, to enable that to happen. And the companies are just not set up for that. Because as you said, they want that kind of aggressive, I'm the top, you do what I say, don't worry, you don't need to trust me, you just need to do what I say. And it's just not working anymore. And it's really going to sort of tumble down until someone takes hold of it. And I think if they don't, what will happen, you'll start to see a lot more extreme maverick behaviour in the workplace.
Yeah, funnily enough, I've had, it hasn't happened to me because of that aggression earlier on, I think, but I've come across quite a few people who are bullied in the workplace as a result of this aggression. And, the effect of that is actually horrendous in terms of, the dysfunctionality of, what happens in the company. So that's something I've also spent a bit of time on, helping people who find themselves in that situation and don't know how to handle it, because very often the company also doesn't know how to handle it. It's because usually it's the hierarchical approach. If it's the boss that's being a bully, then the system tends to support the boss without really knowing how to handle the situation, because they want to support their management and at the same time they want to solve the problem. But in my experience, that is actually a big problem. However, it's interesting that when you come down to it, what we're looking at as performance in the workplace is really about empowerment of individuals. And I know that's been something that people have talked about a long time. But as a result of that, I think coaching and supervision in the workplace is really set to take off. And it is taking off, but because of the ability of coaching and supervision to help people develop the skills that we've been talking about, that's become really a requirement for this modern business.
Yeah, and I think the problem, because as you know, I do a lot of leadership work in organisations. I think the problem is that the companies want to empower the employees, but they don't train or empower the managers to do it. So it seems to fail. So like the managers will either delegate everything and it doesn't work, or they say they're empowering, but they're not really. They're stopping them from working. Or they're in an environment where why would the employees care? Why would they care to get the organisation's goals done when they're treated so badly? And I think the people in charge often go, well, they're just, snowflakes. They just don't understand. But what they don't realise is that the world has changed, and what Mavericks want and demand and get through sheer will and expertise, millennials and Generation Z want. And it's no good by saying they don't have the expertise, so they're not having it, when you think what they ask for is what everybody should have. They want managers that they can trust. They want a company that's honest. They want an environment that is healthy. Why should only Mavericks get that? Because they can either manipulate or influence that. Why shouldn't everybody have that? And companies just aren't set up in that way. Glenn, one of the things that you said earlier I found really fascinating when you said that your childhood provides an early blueprint of behaviour. What do you think that looks like in terms of a Maverick child?
That's a fascinating question. Of course, there's the old argument about genetics and environment, and I think it's a fascinating question because I do believe we all come in with a certain two blueprints, if you like, by the time we are a certain age. So first of all, the blueprint that we have genetically are predispositions, which we have embedded when we are born, of course. And it is so profound. I mean, I remember my mother saying, because my father was in the RAF, he was not at home for many, many years. And yet she said, the way you walk and the way that your voice tone is exactly like Dad's. So the influence of genetics, of course, is profound. However, also then we have the environmental issue, which it is so fascinating how we relate to mother. I've done quite a lot of, I'm not a psychologist, but I've certainly studied enough to have a deep understanding of these issues. And of course, we don't realize that we're separate from the mother at a very, that early age. So, the way that the mother behaves, and, we're human beings, so mum might behave in a certain way, that becomes an unconscious blueprint, and it's not available when we're grown up. We don't realize that subconscious blueprint is there, and yet it drives us. So, for example, if something in your environment caused your mother to be stressed, which I think in my case was certainly true because Dad wasn't there. She had a very limited resources. And of course, she must have got quite angry occasionally. And that you then, as an unconscious child, would pick up that anger as being something that was natural. So as you grow up, that anger is natural. This is, you do not realize that is natural. And, so whatever happened in those they say the first 2 years are critical until you start becoming conscious, if you like, of yourself as being a separate being. And, so this whole business of self-reflection and, finding out from your blind spots, usually from other people, as you did very clearly, it starts to, if you like, surface the unconscious. So all of this work that I've done is really about surfacing the unconscious. And of course, meditation, whichever form you use, actually gets very, very deep into the unconscious, like dream work, for example. I'm very interested in dream work and how that can talk to us from our deep, deep mind, of course. And, if you want to make big changes in your life, you have to become aware of those habits. And then, of course, you can do something about it. So, that's and the philosophy behind this is well known in psychological terms now. So I think if you find people who want to become, to change the way that they react, and of course find a more functional way of behaving, then they have to be prepared to do that work, which a lot of people, of course, that's something that the individual has to make a choice on. And I don't know about you, but not everybody wants to do that work.
No. It reminds me a bit, I've written this blog, and it's about objective truth versus relative truth. Because one of the things that, I don't know about you, that just winds me up the most is when somebody tells me there's no such thing as one truth, right? And I'm like, don't be ridiculous. Of course there is the truth. And they're like, no, it's all about how we feel and how we see. And I was like, no, the sun is in the sky. That is the truth. Whether you feel it's not there has no, it is that. Do you mean it? So, and so it's that kind of almost lazy research. Do you know? It's like saying, it's like, well, I believe this, and so therefore that's just what it is. It's like, well, no, that's not right. Like, there are some things that are true and some things that are not.
Well,
there's no such thing as alternative facts. They're called lies. They're not facts because they're not true. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, I had a very interesting discussion online with a lady who, was anti a lot of the sort of way spirituality is worked with. And spirituality, let's face it, it's a funny word. People understand so many different things about that. But if we say it's, an interest in why we're here as being a spiritual subject, then I think it's quite fascinating. And she was totally against the emotional, sort of love approach. Because she was an ISTJ. Now, anybody that knows Myers-Briggs will identify, that is a very fact-based person. They want evidence. They're judgmental. In other words, they really research the facts. And she came to the understanding that there was, if you like, a higher intelligence in the world by studying synchronicity. And she was totally rigorous about that. She disclaimed all the love and light story that you hear from that group of people. And she said, I just want facts. I will do research based on how often does synchronicity show up in my life and prove that what I've done, or if you like, support what I've done, was the right thing. And she's written a book, and I think it's fascinating because it's so much about what you're saying. It's about the facts. And she researched that, and she came to her belief in something bigger than herself by just research on those particular issues. Again, interesting argument.
Yeah, it is interesting. And going back to the childhood thing, I believe, there are certain things that you're predisposed to do. And I think, personality is one of those things that, you're predisposed to be a certain way. However, I think nurture, the environment, switches on things like epigenetics. Some things will happen this way because of the environment you're in. And other ways, other things don't get switched on because of the environment that you're in. So it's not a either or, like you were saying. It's like, yes, nurture and genes make a difference. But I think when you look at the evidence, it seems to suggest that environment will win out because you can learn to behave in a certain way.
Certainly epigenetics is a fascinating subject. And I think, it actually challenges very much the geneticists, the very mainstream geneticists claim that everything that happens will happen, despite what. So you will have certain medical problems because of your genes. And yet research has shown that, you are the manager of your genes. As you say, epigenetics says that you can change your genetic, whether it's influence or whether it's, actually happens as a micro level. I don't think people are aware yet, but certainly the whole argument about mind over matter, impacts on epigenetics. And I think from my experience, if you have the attitude, I can do anything, if I decide I want to do it, is absolutely the truth.
Yes. I think, you know what? I think what happens is that quite a lot of the world doesn't like the extreme. So like, like when you do personality testing, I always come out at the extreme ends of whatever it is it's testing. Yeah. I'm never like in the middle, it's like I'm either at the top or at the bottom, I'm not, and it's like, but people doubt whether that's possible in a personality. And it's just like, because everybody kind of strives to be somewhere in the middle. And it's not like, and I think with Mavericks, things are black and white. It's like, I will tell the truth. And that's it. That's it. I've made a decision. That's what's happening. It's like, what about this? What about that? No, because it's wrong. I don't know. While we're still talking, it's wrong. It's that kind of, and people just don't want those extremes. And I think that's what makes it difficult, Mavericks, when they have to fit into organisations that don't provide flexibility. So like I found, I don't know about you, but I found in the corporate world, especially as I was younger, until I learnt, I never wanted to play politics because I get to the point of them. But then you get buffeted in the politics because you're just trying to steady a path of just being honest and ethical and doing the right thing. And yet you're buffeted by other people who are, lying and doing all sorts of stuff. And you're trying to have this moral high ground. And so in the end, not like you don't lose the moral high ground, but you're much more aware of what's happening. And you sort of, because like, I don't know about you, but I found that, so you was doing like, I don't know, here's the vision of the company. We want to do this. But in practice, we're doing that. And then you'd call it and say, I thought we were supposed to be like looking after customers, but we're actively not. So this is wrong then, isn't it? It's like, no, it's not. It's like, why is it not? Because you said over here you want to do this, and then over here you were doing that. I'll give you an example. I worked for an insurance company. This is, again, I was quite young, and one of the things we prided ourselves with was being like, fair. So we'd have we'd have a customer who put a claim in, and if they were underinsured, there was a penalty, right? So so they wouldn't get what they're supposed to get because they were underinsured. So my view was, if you're taking down the details and they were claiming less than that they should do, you would tell them. Right, so that was my 17-year-old logic. It's like, so they'd phone up and you'd say, "Oh, you're claiming for this. No, it'll cost you twice as much to get a new one. So you need to put it up at this price." And then people, and I remember not my Maverick boss, but another boss was saying, "You can't do that." And I was like, I don't understand. Why not? Because that's fair. That's what, if we're going to penalise people for being underinsured, if they're claiming less, because we know they can't buy the thing with the money you give them, because it's not at the right price. So why? And they were like, "You just don't understand." And I was like, "No, I don't." To me, it was fairly obvious. And it's like, and it's not. And I remember leaving insurance because I got quite disillusioned, because I was also studying the insurance degree, the ACII, which was all about insurance transfer risk. And, so it had all these lofty ideals, but in practice, it's not what we're being required to do. And I was like, I can't deal with the dissonance between the two. So, in the end, one of the reasons I decided to leave was because I got completely disillusioned, because it was supposed to be this very lofty, thing to be in. Insurance is, but, insurance and the whole history of it was about helping people and doing the right thing. And yet, it even has its own law, and the law is based on the principle of utmost good faith. And I was like, but we are not acting in utmost good faith if you don't want to pay out a claim that they should pay out.
I know.
So I had to leave, and I think most Mavericks make that decision. Socialised Mavericks will make that decision.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
it's kind of weird.
I'm very interested in the personal power versus the corporate power, if you like, and I think this whole business that Mavericks do have is this ultimate sense of fairness and justice, and and if you come across a situation where it's not working, that's something that really presses our buttons. And we tend to then, fight like drowning people, because it's a no-go line for us. And actually, I think, the more more as we go into this strange world where things are so chaotic, as a person, being a maverick is the most important thing, because I am passionate about what I do. And I think that's what mavericks are. They're passionate about what they do, and they insist on getting the juice out of their job. And getting juice means, fighting for what is right in a as best a way that you can. I actually had, when I put in a claim, one of my last but last year I put in a claim for expenses, and the guy who does the accounts, who was quite picky, would take me up on certain issues. He came back to me and said, "Glenn, you're underclaiming." That is the first time in my life it's happened, and you mention it now. And yeah, I mean, that was amazing. I was just so amazed. But there's a guy who personally is taking responsibility for doing his job properly. And, wow, I was so impressed. And there's actually a management tool which I came across in my career, which I thought was amazing. And it's called the undiscussables. I'm sure you've come across it. So you go into a company, because I've done a lot of work as a consultant. You go into a company and you listen and you watch and you evaluate and you look at what is not being discussed, which is actually one of the biggest problems. So your situation that you just talked about would be, as a consultant, as a high-level consultant, what I would say is, hang on, guys, exactly what you've been talking about. And those issues, of course, are really tough for companies, but they're lifesavers, because if you're going to stay in business today, I think you have to be customer focused. Let's face it, the business is so volatile that a customer there's no such thing as loyalty. Customers expect people to be ethical.
I think it's more than that, though. I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's more that I think we need to be employee focused, because then the customers are then you're focused on the customers. Like an employee that's happy and cares and believes in the company is such an advocate for the company. They will take the right decision for the customer because they feel safe at work. Their opinion, they feel safe and validated at work, so they will cross the line. It's a bit like, again, I remember being young, working in a call center, and someone comes in, you deal with the issue, and the same person comes back because you're doing a good job, so you have no problem giving your name out. Right? So they come back and they say, "You told me this was going to happen, and it didn't happen." And you're like, "I don't know why it didn't happen." And then you take responsibility. So you take the customer's name, you get up from your desk, you walk to the various departments, and you sort it out. Then you call back the customer and say, "This is what's going to happen," and the customer's then happy. But what you've just done is blown like 4 different types of rules within the organisation, and so they don't like that behaviour, and they've told you you've not done your job properly, and then you're stuck with dichotomy. But now we have a happy customer because I've made sure her complaint was dealt with by literally walking 2 meters across the room to ask the person to dig it out from their backlog and sort it out, which they then done, and here's a result. And you're upset because I left the phone. It's like, I don't get the dichotomy. It's but I think the way that the world is going now, that kind of behaviour is becoming more commonplace. So organisations need to change, because if you think about like millennials, I mean, even the next generations coming up, they don't have what we have. They know they're not going to have their own home probably till they're 40. Right? And they're like, and they start off like, say, 20 years before they get their own home, and they know that the company really doesn't really care that much about them, in the sense that there's no job for life. There's even no job guaranteed for 2 years, let alone 5 years or 10 years now. So that individual goes, what do I need to do? Well, I need to suck as much development and much stuff out of this organisation, because, in 2 years' time, I need to be looking for something else. And if they don't get that, they'll move. And I think they need to have meaning, because if you're not, if you're not going to maybe like a baby boomer, be there for 30 years, or maybe for Generation X, where you're there for, a certain amount of period of time, you'll go up the ladder for a bit and then you make a lateral move and then continue the ladder. If all that stuff isn't there, and you're going to work extra long hours, and you're going to be renting, and you're going to be paying off student loans and all the rest of it, then work has to mean something. It has to be enjoyable. You have to be having some purpose. And what's happening is organisations aren't used to that mindset, and then aren't used to show purpose in jobs. And then they wonder why people won't stay or won't care. So what happens is they don't care about the customer because they're not happy. They're just, you can always tell whenever, as a consultant, you go into organizations, and one of the great indicators of whether people enjoy their jobs is at what point of the day do they stop working? So, so like when it's like 4:30 and everyone's packed up and they're sitting there talking, you go, this is not right.
It's a good indicator.
Or like you phone a company and it's dead on 9 o'clock, or say maybe it's 5 to 9 and the phone's not picked up. You go, and there's people sitting there waiting until 9 o'clock because they don't want to answer the phone.
Yeah, I've experienced that with stores. You're standing outside and somebody's standing inside and they're looking at their watch before they open the door.
And you're like, literally, it's 30 seconds. Or, it's just, it's a bit funny. I remember years and years and years ago going to a department store up north, and it was very much like, are you being served? And then I think it opened at 9, and at 9 o'clock when it opened, that's when they started setting up. So you could see them through the thing and they're all yapping and chatting. And at 9 o'clock, they started taking all the stuff out and to put up on the, and you're like, seriously? I've been here 10 minutes and you've done nothing. And now, and I asked, I said, I'm from down south and it's a bit strange. And they're like, oh, we start work at 9. So we set up at 9. It's like, but you have customers at 9 and there's nothing on display. But it was a concept. It's like, oh, and he's thinking, seriously? That's so weird. So there you go. This has been a fantastic conversation. Will you come back again and have another fantastic conversation with me?
I'd love to. And I think a lot of people will identify with the things that we're talking about, which is great.
Yes, I agree. It's been fascinating. We've gone all over the place, but it's been a really good conversation. So thank you,
Judith.
You're welcome. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Glen as much as I enjoyed having it. If you'd like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group. And my website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.